Laugh 13. Sabrina tells Ambrose she just ate the best devil's food cake ever with him. Then she wants to go shopping. I've never seen him call her cousin before. And it's surprising that a man in an 80s comic would be portrayed as eager to accompany her in shopping. Then Sabrina hiccups and changes a woman's hairdo to be bigger and more upright, which only doesn't come out of nowhere because the title of the story gave it away. It's not as bad as it could be. It's not like her original hair looked good anyways. It's not creative to do this ridiculous idea that she can cast spells she didn't imagine just by hiccuping, because it was already done a few times. But it is going to require the writer's creativity to show us every unpredictable spell she casts. Ambrose wonders how Sabrina managed that when a horse-drawn carriage shows up, and it takes 2 panels to dawn on him that she has the hex cups, a rare form of witch hiccups. This would only make sense if she caught it from being around other witches who spend time with witches beyond her family. It makes more sense than it happening every time she has normal hiccups. And it being rare tries to justify why it took Ambrose more than a second to figure things out. He states the obvious, instead of thinking up a spell to say to get rid of her hiccups or zapping up a cure. I guess it's justified because her hiccups aren't giving him enough time to expend the brain power to come up with a good pair of rhymes, because he'd be distracted by them every time. The hex cups being rare tries to explain why he doesn't know how to get rid of them after centuries of living. He suggests the obvious solution, and Sabrina finally says that everyone's noticing and wonders why he won't reverse everything she's done. For no reason he says he can't because he's got an appointment with his witch doctor tomorrow and was told to hold off on all magic for 24 hours beforehand. This was clearly based on not being allowed to eat before surgery, so at least I can see the attempt at logic, but it really makes no sense. It'd be more believable if he said he doesn't like mortals, so he won't reverse his spells. Instead he says he'd love to reverse them if he could, but can't because of a diabolos ex machina. He says he can't get a later appointment because he's been waiting for a long time to get the one he has. Meanwhile, the whole time they're talking about this, I'm wondering why Sabrina doesn't warp to an empty field until her hex cups go away. Or at least instinctively warp home. Nothing she's doing with the hex cups seems to matter to me enough to type down, other than the obvious fact that they're putting people in danger. And we know the comic has the good sense not to show people getting killed from that anyways. Sabrina wants him to get her home fast, not thinking far enough ahead. If she went home, she'd find out that it's better not to endanger and damage her house with hex cups. Then the story gets artificially extended because for no reason Sabrina doesn't just warp home. She takes a cab, so it ends up becoming a blimp. Thankfully, the driver stays calm and thinks that it's only a nightmare and it's gonna be okay. And it works out for Sabrina because they get to avoid traffic and go home. Ambrose says that's an original one when Sabrina causes the furniture in her house to stick to the ceiling, and she thanks him even though she had no control over that happening, because he was trying to cheer her up. Hilda zaps up the old family remedy and tells Sabrina to drink it. Conveniently, all of her hex cup spells get undone afterwards too, as if every spell that's done because of the hex cups has a record on it labeling it as such, so that the antivirus she drank could undo them all. Oh, never mind. The story throws out logic and Hilda says it was just plain old water because witches get rid of the hiccups the same way as everyone else. But it wasn't normal hiccups, it was hex cups. I don't remember water curing my hiccups, especially not right away. That water would have to have a specific spell in it to undo all of her hex cup spells without her say-so. This story, much like an episode of the 70s cartoon, was about Sabrina getting the hiccups, and somehow that leads to her casting a bunch of spells that freak people out, even though she didn't visualize any of that. At least it's explained that this only happens when she catches a rare hex cups, instead of always being the case for the hiccups. That tries to make it more believable. It's just a magic witch virus that infects her magic. But I don't care. It wasn't nearly as charming as the 70s episode where she had this problem. We aren't given much of a reason to care about what's going on because we can trust the comic not to go too dark and kill or injure civilians. And I wouldn't have liked that anyways because it wasn't properly explained why she had the hiccups and what it is. So it's all random stuff happening that has no relevance to the main characters anyways. It's not like I got to see Reggie get humiliated this time. The story puts in a good effort of trying to justify why Ambrose doesn't reverse the spells, but I'm just forced to assume that Sabrina can't willingly cast spells in this state, so she can't reverse the spells herself, let alone warp home, which was the obvious idea for her, but instead she puts a cab driver at risk going to a cab. At least the results worked out in her favor, but the ending made no sense either. It had an unoriginal premise at first, but it tried to be different by having the plot take place out in the city, in mostly one setting. Laugh 14. Sabrina complains to Hilda that she's meeting her boyfriend at the disco, and he wants her to bring along a date for his friend. It's weird that she calls him my boyfriend in front of Hilda instead of saying his name, implying that she's dating someone Hilda's not familiar with. Hilda decides to help by saying she'll show up with her friend, which is her after she makes herself look pretty. I guess the reason she used a Cinderella-style wand for this is to save on magic. Sabrina advises her to change her shoes and wonders what they'll do for transportation. Hilda tells her to keep her eyes on a giant pumpkin and lizard that were conveniently there on the front lawn for no reason, and turns them into a limo with a chauffeur. They meet up with the guys. It's revealed that Sabrina's boyfriend is named Scott, and Hilda says the only dance she knows is the minuet. Sabrina foolishly tells her to fake it and risk embarrassing herself instead of casting a spell to make her a good dancer. Thankfully, the story has mercy on her and doesn't have it be a plot point that she's embarrassing herself with her dancing. Instead, it instantly cuts to being almost midnight, so Sabrina has to rush Hilda out of the ball. Do they still have balls? Wouldn't it be called a dance? Scott assumes that Sabrina was so anxious to leave because she was jealous of Hilda instead of because it was so late at night. Sabrina picks a fight with Hilda for no apparent reason by wishing she would act her age as they're in the limo. It turns midnight and Hilda returns to normal along with everything else she used the wand on. The next day, Scott's friend heads for Sabrina's house, and for no reason, Hilda plans on hiding instead of simply making herself look like she did before. Her lame excuse is that she doesn't have her magic wand, which the writers should know it's nonsense because she's used magic tons of times before without it. Apparently this takes place in another universe where witches need wands to use magic. But even then, there's no excuse for her not having her wand. Predictably, Brad shows up with the glass slippers she left and sees Hilda's feet behind the curtains. He wouldn't think it was Hilda because those feet would look old, and she could have easily hid it somewhere else. She gets told to come out, and for no reason she leaves her hiding place with a smile just to be disappointed by him running away screaming. An unrealistically rude reaction. She says the next time she plays Cinderella, she'll make sure Prince can't run so fast. Why wouldn't she just cast a spell to make him not run so fast? Her problem is that he's running at all and she's too upset to chase him, so it won't even matter how fast he ran. So her line was dumb anyways. This story is about Hilda disguising herself as a teenager and going on a double date with Sabrina to dance. Nothing interesting happens. It just tries to rip off the part of Cinderella with the fairy godmother, but in modern times, when she could have easily not used the wand with a time limit like Cinderella at all. And the ending would have been easily avoided because Hilda would have disguised herself with her own magic. And of course there's the little detail that she's way older than Brad anyways, which was probably what we were supposed to focus on to not feel bad that Hilda lost out on it. Also, the 70s cartoon already had a Cinderella-themed story. Betty's Diary 25. We see Esmeralda about to play baseball for once. I don't know why she insists on calling it Bobby Sox ball, though. Sabrina whispers at her to steal second base, and she uses magic to literally get the base to her. This implies that she has no idea what the rules of baseball are. She is from another planet, after all. Betty Me 175. In the comedy page, Birthday Blues, Hilda's upset because this is her 390th birthday. Harvey says in front of Hilda as a joke that Hilda doesn't look a day over 100. And even though he clearly laughed when he said that, Hilda hugs him for it and says, "You really know how to cheer up an old girl. That's pretty nice." But she would know he was just making fun of her. He'd be really confused at this. Everything's Archie 143. Sabrina and Hilda go on a roller coaster ride, and the people in front of them complain that it's too boring. Hilda decides to liven things up for them. The roller coaster ride goes off the track and flies and makes a safe landing. Of course, this doesn't make people happy either. And Hilda smiles anyways when complaining that some people don't know what they want. So she might have just done this to scare them. Betty's Diary 26. I'm somehow expected to believe that witches only used to be the center of attention because of their unusual appearances. And now that there's a bunch of teenagers in punk hairstyles, nobody gives witches a second look. even though the punks still aren't dressed like witches and don't look ugly. Laugh 15. Zelda wonders why Sabrina is so unhappy, and Sabrina says she has to do a boring report about Houdini for school. Uncharacteristically, Hilda thinks the guy who does magic tricks was one of the most exciting people in history. I guess this means he was actually a warlock. She doesn't correct Sabrina when she says he was just a mortal, and decides to send her back in time to meet Houdini in person, rather than warping him to her. She says that's a great idea and says she loves her aunt, and Hilda says radical to humor her, even if that's out of character. Zelda wishes her good luck as she's warped back in time. Then Zelda gets worried because she forgot to warn Sabrina not to disturb the fabric of time. Somehow Hilda thinks Sabrina's smart, and a kid notices her warp over to Houdini's building, which she must have dismissed as a hallucination, or been too scared to question her on. She wonders if she can use a stage entrance to interview Houdini before the show. And then some men try to mug her, without guns. And then Houdini shows up in a puff of smoke and hits one of the idiots away, and they end up tied to a pole. I guess he's a warlock, because he appeared in a puff of smoke outside of the magic show building. He politely asks Sabrina out for lunch. She asks him if he has magical powers and lies that he's only rumored to have them and can't find proof that it exists. But he has a nervous smile. Someone tells him he's on in 5 minutes and gets thanked by him, and she thanks him for telling her to watch his performance. Since he takes a long time in the milk trick, Sabrina gets worried and magically opens the locks for him. But it turns out he didn't need her help after all. And the story ends with her in a big milk jug saying that she's practicing her magic. So the story just ends there? This story didn't explain why Hilda, a witch, thought a mere magician was one of the most exciting people in history, because I'm not told for absolute sure whether he's a warlock or not. It seems like he is, but he denies it, and Sabrina doesn't reveal herself. Most of the time, Hilda gets bored by magic tricks. Even Sabrina became bored by them. It'd make more sense for Sabrina to decide to go back in time to see him, instead of it being Hilda's idea. She has to do a school report on Houdini, and she's sent back in time and enjoys getting to meet him. He gets to look like a hero saving her from some muggers. Thank goodness it was implied that she was about to save herself, so it's not like she's wimpified. Laugh 16. Sabrina's about to spend quality time with Hilda watching a movie when a confident guy teleports to their living room. Sabrina lampshades him appearing in a puff of smoke since witches don't have to do that after teleporting. He's confused that no one told Sabrina about her future husband, but he's still smiling. Hilda says oops, and he puts in the effort of calling Sabrina Lamb Chop and says that their wedding was pre-arranged by the Witches' Council when they're babies. I suppose it's realistic that witches who've been alive for hundreds of years would be old-fashioned and still do arranged marriages because they think marriage is such an important thing to get that it should be secured by any means necessary with the best family ever, even if there's no guarantee that the couple would ever be happy together. I kinda like that the Witches' Council was called that already. Sabrina finds out that by her 21st birthday, she'll be married to Xavier Peabody. She's only 16, why is he here? The last name's pretty lame. I hope she can keep her own. At least the writer put in the effort to give him a cool first name. But I don't know about this guy, because he shouldn't be so happy when he's gonna talk to someone who clearly won't be happy about this, and isn't guaranteed to end up loving him. I guess he's happy because he's really desperate and lonely, and he's optimistic enough to assume she'll grow to love him. But you'd think he'd feel sorry for her right now if he was really trustworthy. Sabrina says she's not ready to think about marriage, and he says they should start getting to know each other better. That's smart of him, but he clearly should have waited until she was out of high school first. Right now, chances are that she's got a high school boyfriend. Well, if he waited until she just started college, there might be a chance she'd be separated from her old boyfriend. He always looks like an adult, so I hope he isn't. And to be fair, they're both witches, so they're more compatible than her and Harvey, the mortal who's gonna have to constantly get his memories of magic erased and isn't gonna live long compared to her. She'd get to use magic around Xavier whenever she wants, and he actually has a great design. He says they're set to spend a few hundred years together. Why doesn't he just say the rest of their lives? Hilda said witches go on forever. Apparently in this universe they only go on for a few hundred years. Or it's supposed to be a joke where he doesn't have faith in their marriage to last. Hilda gets caught trying to go upstairs to hide. She could have just warped away, but she'd be called out eventually anyways. Sabrina asks her why Hilda never told her about this. Hilda at least apologizes and says that when Sabrina was younger, it didn't seem to matter, and when she got old enough to date, her aunts didn't want to put a damper on things telling her the truth. But she hates Harvey. Sabrina would continue to date him regardless of whether she knew she was engaged. So all that the truth would do is upset her for nothing, when she was already going to find out later. He says politely that since he was so unexpected, he'll be leaving now. But then he says he'll be back tomorrow night for their first date. It'd be more tactful of them to not call it a date, because clearly she's not into dating him yet. He didn't even ask if she had a boyfriend already. Despite her reluctance, he warps away. Sabrina gets told the bullshit that if she backs out of a marriage arranged by the Witches' Council, she'll be reduced to a mortal forever. That's really petty and spiteful of them. They really have an aversion to someone going against their decision. We're not even told what his family is like, which would help explain why he was chosen in particular. It's possible that Dell is related to Sabrina, since her son is actually Sabrina's cousin in the cartoon. So that means Sabrina's family is important, so there would be pressure for her to marry another important family. Sabrina wants to know if there's a way around that, and Hilda says that the groom reserves the right to call everything off without any problems. That's not fair, that's backwards. The 70s comic established that witches have all the power in witch society, and not warlocks. If warlocks are second-class citizens, I suppose the reason for this is that it's meant to give warlocks special treatment for once to make it up to them. You'd think if the Witches' Council were so spiteful to any bride that backs out of the deal that they never chose to make, they'd be just as offended at the guy backing out of it. If all the brides ever have to do is make sure the potential groom won't want to marry her, then that means all the attempts at forcing marriages are clearly pointless because the brides can just intentionally put them off. I suppose the spy witch is constantly keeping track of how many good and bad deeds the witches are doing would have seen enough of them to be able to tell when they're intentionally behaving in a way to make the groom decide not to marry her. So it is possible that that would be punished, but I guess it won't be, or that'd be too depressing. This would happen almost every time. You'd think the council would have long since given up with such a low success rate. Sabrina gets an idea, and when Xavier teleports to her house later, at least having the courtesy to bring flowers, he then looks unsympathetic when he gets mad at seeing Sabrina's awesome new appearance. I guess she was trying to have her hair look bad, but it could have looked a lot worse. In fact, I sort of prefer this to her silly bob. I love her clothes, and she looks pretty confident calling him baby. She says this is the real her and she had just gotten back from a costume party last night. I like that she's holding Salem. She says they can take her broom, which is turbocharged, and she souped it up herself. It goes over to them, and I don't know why he's mad at this. He says he just doesn't believe it, and then Sabrina says all her boyfriends are hanging around, so they have to sneak out the back. As we see a bunch of boys she summoned are trapped behind a door and calling for her. He says they're not going anywhere until they discuss this. She asks him if he disapproves of all the things she's got now, and shockingly, he says he doesn't mind that at all. Then it turns out he was only upset because he saw the cat. He's allergic to cats, and says she'll have to get rid of him. Won't witches have a potion or spell to get rid of allergies to stuff? How's he not thought to try that? There's also allergy medication for cat allergies. This doesn't have to be why he rejects her. He could just turn Salem into a dog. I was expecting a surprise that he'd like her despite her persona, and I was right about that. But this doesn't make any sense. He says that if the cat's more important than him, then the wedding's off. He warps away, and Sabrina calls Salem darling, and ends the story giving him jars of caviar, as her aunts fortunately smile, and Salem thinks with human thoughts. This story was about the warlock that Sabrina was fated to marry in an arranged marriage by the Witches' Council, showing up to Sabrina early in the responsible decision to try to get to know her first before marrying her. But apparently, the groom can decide to call off the wedding even though the bride can't. So Sabrina can carry out a plan to try to get him off-put so that he'll break up with her. Why would this even be a loophole? If this was a thing that people could do, then the Witches' Council would have given up on forcing arranged marriages by now. So he decides to break off the marriage because he's allergic to cats, even though he could just drink an allergy potion. Archie Giant Series 601. Hilda expects me to believe it always takes forever to heat up a cauldron, even though a witch could just point to instantly have it hot enough. Sabrina says they should do something about that. But somehow, instead of her meaning this, she creates a microwave. It's a good thing Hilda isn't too old-fashioned to let her put the cauldron in the microwave. But why did they put it in the microwave manually if it's so heavy, when they could levitate it into it? Betty me 179. Hilda cares enough to ask Sabrina what's wrong, and Sabrina says she can't prevent September from happening no matter how many magic books she studies. Of course, this is because she wants to avoid going to school. I assume that one of the few things witches aren't allowed to do would be to create a time loop so that September wouldn't get to them. Even if it extended to the whole planet. Maybe that'd take too much magic. She should have known that if teenage witches could prevent September from coming around, she never would have experienced one. Betty and Veronica, 24. Hilda thanks the captain for keeping his promise as he looks miserable, and they don't even have a background behind them. It's storming, and Hilda says he was right that they'd have good weather on their cruise. The joke is probably supposed to be that she likes storms just because she's a witch, but no one would like getting rained on. It'd make more sense if she was just being sarcastic.